Okay, it's afternoon in Sweden, so good afternoon to all of you. This is the second edition in the series of 3 international webinars organized by the Finnish Critics Association SARV, and more specifically its project Shine On Critique, or in Finnish Kritiikki näkyy. The webinar is arranged in collaboration with Nordicom, a Center for Nordic Media Research at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. And I'm Maarit Jaakkola. I'm co-director of Nordicom, and I'll be your host today. Welcome. Today we'll discuss art reviews and art reviewers' relationship to politics. And just to define art reviewing and art reviews or art criticism, it's a specialized practice whose intention is to evaluate new works of art in the public sphere. The context for today's webinar is, of course, something that none of us had hoped for. Since late February, after Russia's invasion to Ukraine, we are now witnessing a war close to us. The character of the political in artistic, aesthetic and journalistic action has changed a lot since we started planning this webinar. Rights, civil and human, that used to be taken for granted are now threatened. Practitioners and organizations who could previously remain more neutral are now easily turning into activists, whether they want or not, to combat dis and misinformation and violation of basic rules and rights, and to protect more human aims and values. As a reaction, organizations, academics and intellectuals across Europe and beyond have expressed their solidarity with Ukraine. And art criticism is, of course, not detached from the world, and it does not remain unaffected by what's happening in the global political relations and people's lives. Art will deal, and has always dealt, with experiences of death, war and terror. Refugees will affect art worlds, including art criticism and reviewing. But how should we think of art reviewings or art criticism's relationship to politics and political activism in this new situation? We were supposed to have 4 speakers, but unfortunately Hanna Kuusela has cancelled her participation. Her part entitled Can Art Criticism Challenge Political Hegemonies will be replaced by a small discussion. We are happy to be able to create a small literary salon in the middle of our webinar after our speakers to address your personal thoughts and experiences. So we'll send you to breakout rooms a bit later, and I'll give some instructions for that. But now I will first leave the screen to Maaria Ylikangas, who will greet you from the project Shine On Critique, which is a 3-year project funded by Kone Foundation in Finland with an aim to develop forms and practices of contemporary art criticism. Please, Maaria.
Thank you very much, Maarit. It's nice to be here again. This is a second webinar on this series of webinars that we are producing together with Nordicom, and yes, really glad to be here again. And yes, the situation in the world has changed since we started planning this webinar on politics and art criticism, and the questions we were originally thinking were quite different from this place where we have landed now. So I hope that today's discussion will be generous and open some new views for art critics. And lately in Shine On Critique, we have been working with artists residents We have opened 5 residencies for art critics who come from abroad to Finland, and we just closed the application. I can't find the word now. And a bit later on, we will open the same for Finnish or art critics based in Finland to go abroad for residencies. And after this webinar, two weeks from now, we will be having a workshop in Finnish on politics and art criticism. I hope all you Finnish attendants, you can go to our website and see what for the workshop. There is still some vacancies left there. And I hope that this we can offer some places to think about the relationship of politics and art criticism in our own ways. Was there just a minute? Yeah, and for other forms we have been developing since we last met in October. We have launched this Meet a Critic, a series of discussion with art critics where a person, basically anyone, can meet an art critic and talk about a movie or a book or an art exhibition. And one of the critics that attended this Meet a Critic forum said that this is a lovely way to beat a sort of visibility that is present in online culture everywhere, and it brings people together, kind of facing the basics of art and talking about art. So this has been a private forum that has been very fun for critics and participants both. And we are starting also new ways of making art criticism. This has been discussed, but nothing has been published so far. But I can tell that there is coming up a video essay that has been made by an art critic together with a visual artist who is filming the video essay and directing it, and a sound artist who will be making the sonic atmosphere for the video. So that will be published late this year. And there are other forms coming up, but they are not that far, so I could talk more of them. But there will be some sound, video, short clips, and etc. in different kind of places. And we have also made performance art meet art criticism. We have so far 2 performance artists have made their views on art criticism in our project. Pilvi Porkola's video on corporeal art criticism, a performance video, is in our website, and there is also this Seassa collective that made performance critique on performance festival in October, and we have a script about this performance in our website in Finnish, unfortunately not in any other languages. This is what Shine On Critique has been up to, and I give the voice back to Maarit.
Thank you, Maaria. There are a lot of things happening. You have a critics residence program, you are developing new formats, you have online engagement. That's pretty fantastic. The aim of the project is to make criticism more widely accessible and an exciting space for exchanging ideas, as you described on your webpage. So you can truly see that this has been the case. I saw that also on Instagram there was a quite a relevant clip featuring the Belarusian director and author Andrei Kurejchik, who was talking about the situation in his former country, how people are turning into activists. It was filmed in December last year at the concert hall in Helsinki. So maybe you can leave the link to the chat box so people can access this, because this was a discussion that's related to today's topic, art criticism and freedom of speech.
Yes, absolutely.
And then I saw that within 2 weeks there'll also be a workshop on the relationship between art criticism and politics, right?
Yeah, yes, there will be. It is in Finnish, as I said, and it will be live, not online. And I hope many critics will come to that workshop. We have some great what's the word, education there, and we will have some great discussions there also. And I would like also introduce somebody, Maria Säcker, who has been working with us on this project, left her seat at the Finnish Critics Association last year. She was a chair of it, and a new person, Vesa Rantama, was chosen to be the chair of Finnish Critics Association. And Vesa is here with us right now. He is also working in the project with us, with me and Riikka Lasak. And Vesa, would you like to say hello to everyone?
Oh, hello everyone. Most definitely I'd like to say hello to all of you. I'm sorry that my internet connection here in the office seems to be a bit dragging a bit, so hope you all hear and see me at this moment. I'll keep it brief. I just started as a chairman of the board in this association in the start of this year, and it has been a great opportunity to be also involved in Shine On Critique. And as I was thinking about this event today, politics and art criticism, I think that the horrible situation that we find ourselves in Europe, there's also opportunities in it, because criticism outside the society. So now we have to form some kind of reaction to quickly escalating events. So I think it can be for critics also somehow a good experience on how to be involved in society when it's changing very fast. So I'm looking forward to this meeting as well. Unfortunately, I have to leave at some point, but I will watch the video later on.
Thank you, Vesa, and welcome to SARB, and thank you, Maaria, for this nice update on your project. I guess it's time to introduce our first speaker. So her topic is, I would say, unfortunately, very relevant in today's digital media landscape. It's hate speech. So today we are discussing hate speech with regard to art critics. And our first speaker is Tuija Saresma, who is an adjunct professor, and she's currently working as a senior lecturer at the Department of Music, Art and Culture Studies and at the Research Center of Contemporary Culture at the University of Jyväskylä in Finland. And Tuija's current projects deal with online hate speech, and today Tuija will focus on the art reviewers and critics' encounters of online intimidation and harassment and other unpreferable phenomena. What is it, how does it occur, and what can be done? You can leave questions in written form to the chat throughout Tuija's presentation, and after Tuija's talk we'll have a common discussion. So please, Tuija Saresma, welcome.
Thank you. It's really great to be here, although I find it a bit challenging because I don't really know that much about art critique, and I'm actually not going to talk about that very much. I will rather talk about the kind of general things that can be maybe applied to art criticism as well. But let's see, and I will be happy to discuss these things with you with the expertise on art criticism. So I'm really looking forward to discussions. So I'll try to share my slides. Last time I did that, I had some difficulties. I hope it's, can you now see the?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. Now if I can only, yeah. Is that the kind of, do you see now the?
It's not in the presentation mode yet.
It's not, because that's why I had like difficulties the last time. I don't know how to.
But we can see the slides anyway.
Yeah, let's see if I know. I'll try again. It's there's something that has like yeah, it's in many forms now. Let's see. That's really, I'm not sure why because it has always used it used to work perfectly, but now I have had some difficulties. Now if I try to I also have two screens, so maybe that's one of the problems, because the other one is not, I can't move the mouse actually. But if you see now you see the small pictures there, and then you see the
Yes, we can see it perfectly.
Okay,
just go ahead.
Yeah, we'll do it this way then. Okay, it's not as perfect as I want it to be, but let's try and manage. So yeah, I was asked to talk about hate speech in relation to art and artists, and I think that it is a crucial moment for that, as you also said, because at this particular moment we witness how the war in Ukraine was launched, and it is really based on lies and hate speech, disinformation and propaganda. So that's really, really worrying how these things, like things that I've been working with, have now come true, and people who say that hate speech is nothing to worry about, it's just words, they are so wrong, and we can now see what can happen when hate speech is encouraged. So the situation is really, really horrible. And as you also said, artists have always taken a stand on political situations, and Guernica is a painting that you all of course know very well, and it's probably the most famous example of anti-war art, and I wanted to start with this slide because of that. It was painted by Pablo Picasso, 1937, and it's, as you probably know, is a large oil painting on canvas, and it is one of his best known works, maybe the one and best known work actually. And many critics regard it as the most moving and most powerful anti-war painting in the whole history of art. And it's exhibited in the Museo Reina Sofia in Madrid, and I've seen it there, and it's really, really powerful, truly. And it's really big also, and it portrays the suffering brought up by violence and chaos. This is actually from Wikipedia, so I'll just read what Wikipedia says about this painting. It portrays the prominent in the composition are a gored horse, a bull, screaming women, a dead baby, a dismembered soldier, and flames. And that is unfortunately something that we could actually see right at that moment when we look at the news films. Picasso painted Guernica at his home in Paris as a response to the 26th of April 1937 bombing of Guernica, which is a Basque country town in northern Spain. And it was bombed by Nazi Germany and fascist Italy at the request of the Spanish nationalists. So I think we also can see here the dangers of nationalistic fervor. Yeah, so the painting got really famous and widely acclaimed, and it actually helped bring worldwide attention to the Spanish Civil War. So it was an important thing in the kind of acknowledgement that now was that people started to look at what's happening in Spain. So art had a really kind of strong effect there. Let's see how I can change that. Maybe this way. No. Oh, this is so horrible. I can't. Just a moment. Saanko tukko jees? I don't know. I can't. Sorry. Mitenpä saan tämän hiiren siis liikkua tänne toiselle näytölle? Mille?
Sulla on vissiin nyt tämä järjestys on väärin. Mä tuolta ulos ja tällä.
No, mutta missä mä nyt oon? Tuolta, okay. Sorry about this. Really sorry about. Did it change actually? No. Now, yes. You see the second slide now, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and sorry about this. It's really embarrassing. So a few words about concepts. About like art and activism and artivism. You are probably very familiar with that word. And I'm thinking that maybe there could be something that combines research and activism. And I don't mean just like sort of thing that has been done, but I'm trying to kind of formulate this new concept, which is in Finnish tutkivismi, that kind of combines research and activism. And then I'm kind of asking here, what is then activist art criticism? And this is something that you probably will think about yourselves and try to imagine ways how art criticists could be engaging in what's happening in the world right now. So maybe art criticism could be some kind of a critical art related agency. Yeah, I think these questions are really essential now because as artists and art critics and as researchers, it's really critical and crucial at the moment to oppose the war in all possible ways. And I'm thinking that maybe these definitions could help us, or these conceptualizations could help us in doing that. And so I'll just briefly go through these concepts. So activism is obviously political activity for or against something. And artivism, which is like activist art, it seeks to influence the advancement of the things it pursues through art and culture. So artivism pursues a political agenda through art. And we have coined this concept poetic activism with my colleagues Kaisa Hiltunen and Nina Saskilahti. And we call poetic activism this kind of agency that in which artists seek to influence the audience through art's own aesthetic means. So poetic activism thus seeks to touch and see things in a new way. And we have written an article about this I think it's in media ja viestintä. It's in Finnish, so but yeah, it's we discuss three artists kind of this aesthetic means with which they take stand on refugee crisis. And then I'm thinking that maybe there could be something compared with poetic activism in the kind of academic field. So when doing research, we could also try to see things in a new way. And there is already this term taisteleva tutkimus, which would be like fighting or combat research. And I don't like the sound of it right now because it's, I wouldn't like to use these warlike metaphors or concepts, but that's what Juha Suoranta and Sanna Ryynänen call this kind of research that is clearly attached to academic tradition, but it emphasizes that research can and should have social significance. And these kind of combat research methods refer to critical, positional, participatory, and functional research methods that look at social reality and change the world together with people. So activism, artivism, and poetic activism often appeal to emotions, and they touch kind of experientially. But I think that also research, and that's something that I would like to kind of develop, that research could do the same thing. And not only in the way that this taisteleva tutkimus combat research does, because it appeals specifically to those that are involved in that study, in the design of the study. But I think that we should like develop some means for inquiry that can have a special significance in that it appeals to logical thinking and reason and argumentation, where activism actually appeals to political inclusion, and artivism refers to action through art. So this is something that we are trying to develop, this tutkivismi thing that combines research and activism in this research project that is also actually funded by Kone Foundation and led by Aleksi Knuutila. So today the question is, could maybe art critique be involved in activism somehow? And what could that be? What could be the kind of art and activism and art criticism? How could they like participate in societal discussion and political opinion making, perhaps? Or is it so that art critique as itself is already kind of critical as the concept has it? So is it always kind of taking a stand really already? These are the questions that I'd like to raise. Because of course art is always political as it is. And sometimes it's explicitly political, but I think that even the most non-political art is a kind of statement to kind of stay away from political discussion. And art has also been analyzed from the perspective of political science, for example. I'm not really familiar with that area, but here at the University of Jyväskylä, it is possible to take a course on political interpretation of art, and that aims at analyzing the political nature of art and the role of art and media in understanding politics. and some of the literature that is included in this course is I listed it there. So there is this edited volume, Terror and the Arts, Artistic, Literary and Political Interpretations of Violence from Dostoevsky to Abu Kairab. And that was edited by Matti Hyvärinen and his colleagues, and Kia Lindroos and this F. Müller have edited a volume, Art as a Political Witness. And also this book, Visual Global Politics, is kind of discussing these questions. But these analyses date back to last decade. And today, in Russian attack in Ukraine, we see how years of national fervor, the rhetoric of confrontation, the demonization of the adversary, and the attempt to gnaw at European unity, as well as the tireless repetition of constructing threats, have made it possible to turn truth into a lie and criminalize anti-war opinions and imprison those who speak out. So that is something that needs to be analyzed right now with art and with art criticism, probably. And it's really worrying how the leaders of the country that is defending its independence are alleged to be Nazis and fascists and drug addicts that support gay rights and all kinds of progressive, that is non-conservative values, which seem to be kind of the values that Russia now wants to further. So it is kind of the propaganda that has made the people in lead of Ukraine as dangerous, and this discussion, this kind of talk of genocide that is allegedly going on in Ukraine. These are justified these are used to justify attacks and bombings and killings of civilians, also women and even children, and that is really something that we cannot just watch from far, but we need to find ways to do something about that, because it's like really devastating to witness this. And for me, it has actually been sort of relieving to see how artists now take part in the shaping of the opinion atmosphere. And I'm quite sure that the Ukrainians also appreciate this artivism or artistic activism that really takes place on the internet, for example, Instagram and Twitter. And I will give some examples, or one example rather, on that, but let's first talk about kind of the background and the hate speech thing. First, I will talk about populism and then something about hate speech. So I have to say that this is a slide that I have prepared for some other purpose, but when I was preparing this this talk, I read this and I just actually I added nothing. I just added the picture of Mr. Putin there. That's all. I mean, it goes like, it's really the same discussion that has been going on in elsewhere in Europe and in the United States. So nationalism and even ethno-nationalism is often entangled with radical right populism. And here I talk about radical right and authoritarian populism. I don't mean that all kinds of varieties of populism are kind of dangerous, but I think that authoritarian populism and far radical right populism are really dangerous phenomena. For Ruth Wodak, right-wing populism is something that does not only relate to the form of rhetoric, but to its specific contents, and these kind of right-wing populist parties construct fear and related to these various real or imagined dangers. They propose scapegoats and they blame these scapegoats for threatening or actually damaging our societies in Europe and beyond. And populism is always, there's not necessarily any core message in populism as such. It can attach to various kinds of ideologies, but populism is always based on dichotomies and making these kind of divisions between us and the others. And especially in right-wing populism, it is there is a really stark dichotomy that opposes us and our nation against the others. And this can be seen really clearly in what's happening in Russia and in Ukraine at the moment. And right-wing populism is founded on inciting fear and looking for scapegoats. And it's about constructing or performing real or imagined threats. And as we have seen in Russia, the threats are really imagined, and the talk about Nazis and fascists that supposedly lead Ukraine are like, there's no truth value in those claims at all. So according to populist logic, problems are allegedly created by a guilty group, whether corrupt elite, the European Union, intellectuals, or particularly in the case of right-wing populism, immigrants are often blamed. But as we know, in Russia, it is said that Russia has had to go there and defend the country against Nazis, which is like just pure propaganda and a lie. In right-wing ideology and also in authoritarian populism, everyone is either a friend or a foe. So there are no kind of gray areas. It's all black and white. Everyone is either a victim or a perpetrator, and fear is incited by creating a threatening other that is capable of evil deeds, as we have heard in Russia or the Russian propaganda. And it can be said that the role of affects or emotions in creating threats by inciting fear is really significant. And othering is performed through gendering and racialization. And we are racialized also in the case of Russian propaganda as a homogeneous members of a white nation. So it's also racializing us as white people and kind of the right kind of people that are not Nazis and not fascists. So yeah, this is the case that we can now that we are really witnessing in Russia as well, even though the slide was prepared for other purposes. So what about hate speech then? Some words about that. The concept of hate speech refers to demeaning, threatening, or stigmatizing expressions that are often based on intolerance and hatred and targeted at a certain person or group of people based on their gender, sexual orientation, ethnic background, or race. And hate speech is a gendered phenomenon. It is mostly produced by men and received by women. And this has been found out in many research projects. So it's a fact, even though some people say that it is not, and some people even say that there's no phenomenon like hate speech actually at all. But it has become more frequent with digitalization. and also the growing popularity of social media. So it's easy to kind of send hate speech through social media. And it also coincides with the rise of right-wing populist upheaval. So these things are connected. And also hate speech often utilizes the effective rhetoric and binary logic of populism, which constructs an us and a them as hierarchic and adversarial groups. And as I said, in right-wing populist rhetoric, the others become the targets of hate speech against whom even violence is justified. And as we can see in the case of Putin's Russia, it is the imaginary Russian nation that is protected against the progressive Western values. And in this propaganda, Ukrainians really become Nazis and fascists, which is quite ridiculous. They also talk about Europe as gay robe because Europeans have this tolerant attitude towards queer people, for example. And that is something that really conservative ideology of this Eurasian Russia does not tolerate. And also Putin's trolls that are really active on the internet, they incite hatred against others, and they support this strong nationalist white Russia and its Tsar-like authoritarian leader. So hate speech has been really used for these nationalistic purposes, and to kind of legalize or make these attitudes to war more acceptable, and that is really worrying. So just this is kind of the last slide that has that I'm trying to kind of lay the background on art and art criticism as political activity, and then I will show some examples, and then we can discuss these issues. So I have in my work analyzed effective online communication that includes besides open hostility towards journalists, researchers, and feminists, and probably art critics as well. It also includes naturalizing the others as threats and targets of hostility and aggression. So there are these certain tactics of how a sophisticated use of new technologies and recruitment strategies are used, and they often focus on the so-called vulnerable populations. They are targeting mostly young and middle-aged men, perhaps with a history of unemployment and frustration. And this applies to the United States especially, but I think that it's also kind of the target audience in Russian propaganda, because it's really easy to kind of incite these feelings of being left out, being left behind, and people who don't earn enough money or so. It's easy to kind of incite these feelings of frustration and fear that is easily turned into hatred as well. So in the case of the United States, the white supremacist populist rhetoric has proven to be really performative. And so it is really not just hate speech, not just words, but the kind of performative effects of hate speech. For example, ex-President Trump's tweets are a really good example of how hate speech becomes action also. And we have witnessed what happened at the Capitol Hill January last year. But I think that Ukraine the war in Ukraine is also a very chilling example, recent example of this. And it could be said that digitally mediated abuse and hate speech online is a really, really integral part of the chain of violence that actually links misogynistic, gender-based violence, violent political discussion and societal structures even, and ideological and political violence, and today also war as utmost violence. So effective discursive expressions of hatred are not only violent themselves, but they also pave the way for an ideological readiness to use other types of violence against the enemy. And we have seen now how this really works. But I will now show some examples, and I think that the Finnish participants here know very well this artist, Kai Stenvall. And he is a Finnish painter who actually became really loved by the entire nation, like a decade ago maybe. He painted these duck paintings, and this kind of duck boom even eventually made Stenvall actually an artist that was despised by critics. His popularity became kind of a burden for him, I think. Now he has taken a really an explicitly political stand, and these pictures are actually very recent paintings that he has been posting or tweeted in Twitter. So these duck paintings that were inspired by Walt Disney have now kind of they are still there, but he has used the ducks, but he has also kind of changed what he's painting now. But for example, in the painting on the left, the duck looks horrified as Vladimir Putin handles a machine gun next to him. And when Stenvall is tweeting these works of art, he also uses political hashtags such as Ukraine and Ukraine crisis, among others. And also he uses the hashtag artists on Twitter frequently. And he has been doing these duck figures, painting these duck figures since the 1990s. And actually he has painted Vladimir Putin also earlier. The first time Putin appeared in his works was already after the 2014 occupation of Crimea. That is one of the reasons behind this current war. So there are these portraits of the devil. One might say that there's no duck anymore. It's just Putin, and he's not represented in a very flattering way in these paintings. And also the hashtags are something that could be paid attention to. He's using hashtags Ukraine war, Putin, art, and peace, and yeah, artists on Twitter is something that he's also using again. I can't actually see what are the stop Russia, Ukraine invasion, Putin, so and peace, hashtag peace again there. So he's really taking a stand. And 3 more pictures then. So he's also painting kind of the opposite part here, and clearly he sees Zelensky in a much more positive light, and he paints this hero-like portraits of of him. And here the hashtags also that are used are also war and peace and Russia, Ukraine, and Ukraine under attack, and yeah, artists on Twitter hashtag again there. Yeah, but I think that is actually what I wanted to share with you, and I would be really happy to have a conversation with you now. So I think I'll stop sharing so I can see you there. So
thank you, and thank you, Tuija. Thank you for sharing some useful concepts to think about the activist approaches. The tutkivismi, maybe something to apply to arts criticism as well. And you were also highlighting some relevant questions regarding how to think about the art review and society relationship, which is quite complex. And I'd say it may be even more complex for art reviewers whose position is even more mediated. If art is mediated, art criticism is mediated through the art that is mediated. So it's essential to discuss also art criticism's position in this picture. So to bring the things you said to art criticism, what I was thinking when listening to you and all these examples where Putin occupied a very central role, no wonder, you can maybe see art review's role also in Putin's Russia in an inversive way, because the effects of propaganda are strengthened and amplified when the counterbalance of two critical practices is lacking. Critical art, not only certain forms of art are allowed in Putin's Russia, and art reviewing, of course, accordingly, so that art reviewers have no ways to make resistance. That applies to journalism, of course, as well. But what do you think? Is it easier, because you were showing many examples of artistic action, is it easier for artists to take political stand and form opinions more easier than for art reviewers? Because if you think of art reviewers, they are mostly dependent on the works they are addressing. They do not, at least not in the genre of art review, talk directly about society. They talk about the exhibition, the concert, the book they are reviewing. And they are also constrained by the norms of journalism that tend to put them into a more objective direction, and journalism really wants to distinguish itself from real world political action. So is it easier for artists to make resistance than art reviewers?
yeah, I think that is the case, and yeah, because the expectations also are kind of you expect artists to take a stand, but you don't expect, as you said, as you described, the art critics to kind of say anything else than kind of objectively analyzing the works of art that they write about. So yes, but then again, what they choose to be evaluated and what they choose to write about is, of course, a political decision, and what they choose not to write about and what they choose not to discuss at all. So you have power in that sense, I think. But yeah, I think the agency is more limited for art critics, certainly.
But yes, they have power and they have tactical power. How could art reviews be used for resistance? I was thinking about consumer reviews, because now in the case of Ukraine war, Ukraine made a call for ordinary people to write on Russian restaurants on Google reviews. So Google reviews were flooded with war news, actually, because ordinary people took action and you instrumentalized the genre of review. But how could professional art critics use art review for putting forward criticism? That's maybe not expected, because I guess, because there's a strong connection to the artworks. You are supposed to review them and not the world. But of course you can always, as you said, you can take some broader questions into your review. But what are the limits? In some more authoritarian political environments, we know that political resistance have been conducted in reviews as well. For example, in former Soviet countries, things that couldn't be discussed in any other articles, they could be possibly discussed in reviews or in cultural pieces, because the audience was also very trained in reading between lines. So is it possible to regard reviews as a hidden place for societal criticism? Do you identify this kind of disclosed criticism in Finnish or Nordic reviews?
Yeah, that I would like to hear the opinion, the kind of audience's opinion on that, or the people that really do this. Do you like, when you write art criticism, is it something that you think that you want to kind of send some hidden messages there? Of course, we have really liberty of speech, and so we can publish. I mean, in the Nordic countries, everything can be published without kind of censoring any opinions. But I think that it could actually be a very good place for like in authoritarian societies to use that as kind of a way to send a political message, or like open up possibilities for critical discussion, because perhaps it is not something that is that the kind of leaders are not expected to, they do not really see art critics perhaps as something political. So it could be easy to say something, as of course art has always been used in that way, that kind of people can read between lines these works of art, but also I think that would apply with art criticism as well. So it's probably really challenging, but it could be done. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yes, and of course we have a tradition that, or we at least believe that cultural pages in newspapers have been the place for free speech, and there it has been a possibility to even counter or contradict the political approaches of the newspaper. So that's certainly possible. Then your presentation was also about the hate speech, and I'd like to ask some questions about that. But please, dear audience, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand, or then you can write down your question and leave it to the chat box. So I was thinking about, hate speech, that has been also studied in terms of journalists, and as you said, it's affecting mostly women, particularly young women, and then those who are more personally visible in news and news articles. And it has also been found that not necessarily those who are working for larger newsrooms, because the visibility somehow protects as well, which is quite surprising. Then studies have also found that women in a bit more atypical genres, such as sports journalism, may receive more harassment, because maybe the expectation is that women should stick to certain genres or so. But when it comes to online harassment and hate speech and art critics, I was thinking the unemployed middle-aged men who are usually targeting the young woman, as you said, They are not traditional audiences for art or art reviews. Quite the contrary, they don't even follow reviews usually. So what's your feeling? How much there is hate speech directed to art reviewers? And I think that's a very interesting question that, as far as I know, there are no studies, no systematic studies on art reviewers and harassment. So maybe that's a sign for the fact that we don't think it exists, or it's not that important as for the major genres in journalism. But what do you think? Is there?
I haven't heard of that, so I don't know really. I haven't seen any research on that topic, and it could be, as you said, because art is not considered as such an important area like sports or politics. So maybe people dealing with art and discussing art are left in peace because it's something that they can do. It's okay if they kind of work there and don't enter these more important arenas, kind of. But perhaps, yeah.
But it's
I
also,
really don't know.
Yeah, and that's a good question to for our audience as well. We can leave it to the discussion part. Have you experienced hate speech? And I guess that in genres where the audience engagement is quite dominant or more expected than in art criticism, online harassment may be more frequent. Art reviews are notorious for not triggering that much audience engagement, not that much that many audience reactions as many other pieces. But of course, you can think that reviewers may receive harassment for their political or opinions or attitudes if you review a book on feminism, gender, or what is it, LGBT issues, and in a very positive way, you might get a storm of hate mail and harassment. I guess that's my just a guess, but we'll hear about them later.
Actually, one thing that just occurred to me is that a colleague of mine has been doing interviews on journalists, and she found.
Oh no, what a cliffhanger. Now you freezed. We were just about to hear what she found, but now we don't hear you. You others, do you hear me? Please make a sign. Is it just Tuija whose connection is poor at the moment?
Yes, I
We hear you.
Okay, thank you. So Tuija, unfortunately we didn't hear what your colleague had found out. Can you repeat it? Now we can hear you.
Okay, yeah, I don't think, yeah, it says that my internet connection is unstable. Sorry about that. So she found, this is a research project that is just, it's ongoing, so they don't have really like this kind of end results yet, but she found out that many editors-in-chief receive email directed only at them that kind of try to tell what to publish and what not. So people are not there. I think there is a kind of a transition from this online hate speech that is kind of targeted at broader audiences to this specifically targeted hate speech. It's not necessarily not hate speech, but it tries really to impact what is published and what is not. So that is something that we need to keep our eyes on, and we have to take a closer look on that, because I think that people have become more kind of, they know that hate speech can be punished. Sometimes it is a crime, and that is it's not accepted. So they try to kind of find other ways to impact and find other ways to have an effect on what's happening. So yeah, there's something. It was just she just told me this yesterday in a meeting, and I have been thinking about that really much. But I think that it might be so that if like, for example, reviews on, as you said, like some sort of feminist books or exhibitions are published, or LGBT groups, things that deal with those, it might be that certain people would not necessarily attack the writer, but contact the editor and then try to convince them not to publish these kinds of things anymore.
Yes, absolutely. And of course it's not always hate speech, but the attempts to affect reviewers' choices and opinions. And where does the line go between hate speech or that kind of efforts and then the lobbying or pin? Yes, good. Let's go further, and as said, we can come back to the question what can be done, especially because that's a very relevant question in our discussion part. We thank you, Tuija, for now, and if you have any questions to Tuija, you can still leave them in the chat box. Now we'll go further to the artist's perspective, because we have another relevant question: how can art criticism create visibility for threatened artists and their work? Artists at Risk is a non-profit network organization working for human rights and the arts. And today it's represented by two persons, Marita Muukkonen and Ivor Stodolsky, who they are both internationally active curators, and they are also co-founders of the initiative Perpetuum Mobile, which brings together art, practice and inquiry. And Marita and Ivor will now tell us about their experiences concerning how art criticism can support artists at risk. Remember to leave questions to the chat. Welcome, Marita Muukkonen and Ivor Stodolsky. The screen is yours.
Welcome. Thank you. It's great to be with you. Thanks for the invitation. We're happy to be here with you. We're obviously in a very difficult moment right now, so we'll have to kind of show you things as they're happening. And so we'll be sharing our screen if that's possible. So yeah, I think this time I'm starting. So I think some of you might not know anything about our organization, so we'll just give a tiny little overview of what we do. Can I share the screen? Indeed I can. So I'll go to this here. I'm actually just on the page of a resident we had in Helsinki very recently, lesbian spoken word artist and her producer partner. But I'll go back to the homepage here. So Artists at Risk is a network organization, as we call it, a network institution with a secretariat, which is a small international secretariat, and we're anchored in Helsinki with our association Perpetuum Mobile. But we operate in approximately 20 cities globally, and more historically, since 2013, it's been about 26 locations. These include like large-scale museums and tiny little safe houses and everything in between. So we have been working for now almost 10 years in the international field, and actually not all of the residencies we work with, these are the blue markers, are on the map. There are more actually here in India, there's one coming in Thailand, there's several we've done in Africa. We're currently, of course, focused very much on two crises, one which you might have already forgotten. Unfortunately, it's really slipped to the bottom of the news. It's very tragic. It's one of the most horrific crises in history is the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan. And we're going to get back to that when we speak a bit about this in future. But at the moment, of course, the big media attention, everything is focused on Ukraine. So we're going to be talking about Ukraine. Artists at Risk basically offers safe havens for artists who are threatened or persecuted for their freedom of expression, for their doing things that are, usually those are the people that stick their neck out. So in similar ways as journalists do, and art critics can be considered kind of in both fields, right? Both journalists and would fall under actually our criteria for being art practitioners, or cultural workers. So this is something that, art critics, scholars, museum directors, curators are also in our remit. And we work in all genres. So historically, we were focused on visual art, but we actually immediately, one of our first residents was a musician. We've had all kinds. We've kind of not worked with too many literary writers or journalists because they have their dedicated organizations. But that is clear that it's not as developed or elaborated for even writers. There isn't a real good residency network. Even though there is something called ICORN, which is focused on that, but it's very full and very kind of, it takes often many years to get a place. So if you're at high risk, then it's very hard to wait for 2 years to get a place to go when you're being followed by a mafia or a government, and you need to leave today. So this gives you some kind of a view of where we started and where we are now.
It's basically, you pose this question that is how kind of art critics and journalists can bring visibility for threatened artists and artists at risk. And we can approach it is by as Ivor mentioned, for example, the situation in Afghanistan right now. It's basically, which is hardly in the focus it's any longer. It is, if you look at the Finnish media or international media. And I think that that's a very concrete way. It's basically also for the journalists and art critics to keep the stories alive of these artists who are still back in Kabul. Just to give you an example that it's basically...
Maybe this conference is an example that it could be reported on.
So basically it's, Ivor just pulled out a website. We just had a big symposium we organized with one of our artist at risk partners at ZKM in Karlsruhe, which is often ranked within the 5 world top museums. It's a big museum. And basically we talked about risk. Can you go to the top? So as you see, the name was Institution and Resistance Alliances for Art and Risk. And we organized this right before actually the Ukrainian war broke out. And one of the questions in this symposium was that where would you go to? It's basically if there would be a war at your door. And that's what happened. But just to,
the subtitle, where would you go if the world fell apart?
So basically, we talk about it is bringing its visibility for threatened artists and artists at risk. We had a very concrete case in this symposium. I've jumped from Afghans to Russia, but we can go back to Afghanistan since I saw the picture of Maaria Aliokhina, which you might know in Finland, who is one of the members of Pussy Riot, who was in prison. It's for 2 years for their action. And basically she was our keynote speaker, but basically she couldn't speak because she was taken into administrative detention, as it's called in Russia nowadays, for 15 days. And she was released, and now she's in the detention again. And if we think about this is kind of Finland's neighboring country, Russia, it's also this kind of stories should be told and highlighted also is by the art critics in the Nordic region. She's very outspoken person. Actually, she got as a first artist, she got a special title we use in Artist at Risk, which is called Artist at Risk Resident Prisoner. So it's kind of, Ivor can explain. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, what it means.
So so we decided at some point, I don't know if any of you followed this story. Sometimes people get tired, they hear Pussy Riot, they go, oh yeah, those kind of, girls jumping around in weird masks, and that's kind of kiddie stuff. That's not really grown up artwork and so on. If you read the work of Maria, Aljochin and Masha, she wrote an incredibly powerful book when she was in prison in the first, when she got a prison sentence, she and Nadia, for the performance they did in the Central Cathedral in Moscow in 2014, if I'm not mistaken. So this book is like really comparable in my mind to Solzhenitsyn's, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, which he won the Nobel Prize for. This is really excellent literature, incredible courage, very, very well written and beautiful, kind of ethical and incredible personality. So I recommend that. So she is then currently still active in Moscow, doing all kinds of things to defend freedom and democracy with a sense of humor, but also very seriously working as, like, for example, to defend Memorial. If you've ever heard of Amnesty International, then you should, heard of Memorial. That's the Russian equivalent of Amnesty International. It's really the most important organization, and they were shut down just a few months ago by the government. So it's really, really it was dystopian kind of situation. She's one of the lead defenders of that institution. Anyway, so we decided, when she was being threatened with all kinds of sentences and was already in jail for 14 days at a time, then sentenced to a special administrative detention, then with an ankle bracelet and so on. We thought, well, the Russian government is playing a very bad game with her about giving her a title that was like, she's under house arrest, when actually she was really under house arrest, but they gave her some other fake title. So we decided to do the same and explain that she's a resident prisoner. She's a prisoner in her own house. So it's kind of like a human rights conference where there's an empty chair. Instead of having an empty chair, we have a full prison, right? And so this title of she's the first to receive it indicates artists at risk who are in prison. And so that I think is a strong statement also to the Russian government that we're watching very carefully what's going on. And this is the kind of thing that reports on that can lead to her release, and it has in the past. And there's many other examples we could name from this list of speakers.
Yeah, and of course, before kind of giving this kind of title, we talked to her lawyer and so on, but she's anyway kind of, her decision has been to kind of speak out. That is basically, she wants media attention, and it's international media attention. Generally, it's of course, when you work with threatened artists and artists at risk, we always take into consideration that if artists want to kind of be visible and talk about kind of the situation, or they also have a possibility, it is not to speak up and not to be named as an artist at risk resident at all. And of course, now we look at the current situation in Russia also for those artists and art practitioners who are in Russia. It can be kind of dangerous to speak up, but there are those people who are doing it. It's basically, I think I don't know if there was kind of more attention to, for example, to Elena Kowalskaya's story, is the artistic director of Meyerhold Theater, who resigned and was very outspoken about, for example, of her resignation recently. And I think at one point is when it comes to Finland and Sweden, we know that also Sweden has now joined forces with Artists at Risk in receiving also dissident artists from Russia. So basically, there are several organizations working on getting Russian high-profile artists, theater directors out, and I think it's important to follow up their stories once they are in Finland, once they are in Sweden. And we, for example, work now with Finnish Theater Association to co-organize residencies for Russian dissident artists. So that's something also for you art critics and journalists to follow, that when there are people who kind of are already safe, they are people who can also speak up about the situation. And I think, especially right now, thinking also about Russophobia, which is increasing in Finland, it's very important to give room for these people to speak up about the situation. For example, yesterday we spoke with our kind of somebody we have worked with earlier. Some of you from visual arts might know, called Marita Stodolskaya, who was running several art institutions in Petersburg, and she's already in Finland with his husband. With her husband, who was categorized as a foreign agent in Russia, and they decided to leave. So they are in Finland right now. So there are many of these voices who can already speak because they are in safe space. They have left the country. So I think that's something also which is a great resource actually to interview and be in touch with.
I think it's good to give some examples of art critics and journalists who've been very amazing in their work that we had experience of directly. And so, for example, here, Sarvi Garenpaye, she's actually Iranian, grew up in Glasgow, lives in the US, but she was very, very active on the Afghan campaign because she wrote, a series of articles at the art newspaper, documenting and calling for action on the Afghan situation for visas and so on. And she was one of the people leading, in a way, our organization to really get more and more involved in Afghanistan, and really took the initiative and continues to do so. And I think that's really an example of courage and amazing dedication. And I think Sarvi should be followed. Then there's also—
Can I say something? Yeah. It is a little bit more about Sarvi, just to give an example, because she's an art critic and journalist who worked a lot in Afghanistan and in that region. What we did together with her in December, I don't know, it didn't get much attention in Finland, but it got attention in foreign media, actually, in the UK, Italy, Germany, and so on. Artists at Risk, it's handed out a letter which was signed by more than 50 art practitioners who are already in,
that's a good point.
who are in Kabul still, and they address it to all the world leaders, appealing them to give visas and open to evacuations, because as we know that most countries is basically closed to evacuations and visa lists at the end of August, which was totally wrong, because it is basically you still can get out of Afghanistan. It's harder and harder as we speak, but it didn't mean that it's when the US left Afghanistan and Kabul as if kind of you couldn't get out. That's not true. And for example,
do you see the letter on your screen? Can I just ask, do you see that? Yeah, so this is, I can just describe a tiny bit. So this letter is a letter to all the top political leaders of the West, and they couldn't sign it obviously because they had to remain anonymous, and so they signed it by holding the profession on signs in front of them. And we then started a social media campaign, which others also held signs, but they could show their faces since they're live in a state of freedom. And in solidarity with these artists who are living in unbearable conditions in the cold of the Afghan winter. So this is worth looking at. We have a whole press pack. You can read it in French, German, Farsi, and the press release is here. So this is still relevant. They're still hiding in these safe houses. We're still occasionally funding them because we do have some funds in our organization for directing small grants to places like Afghanistan, and it's very work intensive. You know, it means going to the local Western Union and standing there for 20 minutes and sending 200 euros at a time. That's how it goes. So this is the kind of work we also do.
And if you want to listen to kind of statements by artists, Afghan artists, that this whole ZKM symposium is online. And there is one person who signed the letter, and kind of we were worried that he wanted to show his face when he spoke, but that also shows the level of desperation of people, that they kind of need to get out. And we will continue series of symposiums. We will have the next ones in Germany, and we try to get the new German government to open up the visa processes for Germany, and we still try to get some artists to Finland. Finland didn't receive any.
Zero.
And basically we are working on we have got funding for 2 artists, so that from some foundations, so that we can apply work permits for them, but that's very long way and they might be denied. So even though there are new crises, as we said, it's extremely important to keep these issues in discussion, that we still have 450 high-profile art professionals who are in Afghanistan and who need to get out.
Actually, I don't know how much time you want to allocate to this. I just wanted to make one more. Yes, it's getting to an end. Are we kind of getting there? We're fine. I just wanted to point out here one of the figures that you see in this image. That's Mohsen Mahmalbaf. He's an amazing filmmaker from Iran who has a kind of interesting history. That first he wanted to be part of the revolution, Islamic revolution against Western power. And then he realized how corrupt and how horrific it was, and changed and became a very big critic of the regime, and then left Iran a few years later, even though he suffered a lot for his cause. And then from France and the UK, he was one of the most important people to get filmmakers. He's a great filmmaker himself, out of the country. And now he was one of the key figures in getting about 300 people out of Afghanistan. And this is why I'm raising this point, is that he advised for many, in many discussions internally, like, do not, especially in France, where there was kind of like this moment where he had gotten so many people out through direct contacts to the government, that he said media attention is counterproductive, right? So journalists also have a kind of responsibility to understand, okay, this is a great news story and I'll get a lot of clicks or something, but maybe it's going to harm the people you're trying to help. So, according to, you have to kind of ask that question of the person you're talking to.
But you might have actually read his interview. Harri Rönnbötti is this kind of interviewed him for Helsingin Sanomat in December, and we actually proposed this interview to Harri because we concluded, and we talked with Mohsen, that since Finnish government hasn't got anybody out, that it can't harm the cause. And we want to get publicity for that. And when the crisis started, actually, we also organized an interview with Helsingin Sanomat. They interviewed one of our applicants, and actually it tells about the time that basically we are right now. Finally, his interview was in Helsingin Sanomat, I believe, in August, and now he's still in Kabul, and now we might have a slight chance to get him to Albania and then to Germany. So it's extremely slow work, but it's very important. We are really happy that Harri basically accepted our proposal and made this interview with Mohsen in December, and that should continue also in Finnish media, even though there are now other topics.
Yeah, can I just mention a few others that have been in the Finnish media? So there's been recently, this is a bit further back, Janusz Ramazani, I think, was interviewed in several newspapers, including Suomen Kuvalehti and Voima. And I think that's an important figure, even if he's kind of a little bit controversial in his way of putting things, but it's important to have these voices. He himself is a refugee who left Iran and was very, much threatened by the regime. And in the end, he's, we have the usual position of, progressive people in the West, that we want to be in solidarity with, people who are, you know, of a Muslim background who are being kind of discriminated against in Europe, right? But at the same time, we sometimes go too far, or at least Kianush thinks this way, and in kind of saying everybody who's Muslim must be great. And he's saying, no, you have to stop the fundamentalists. And I had to leave my own country because of these horrible people. So do not support fundamentalists. And he says very strongly, and he's very angry about how people who want to do good, you know, and be progressive and help the world end up supporting people who are actually destroying the world in those countries. They're fundamentalist Islamicists. So it's important to get that level of complicated kind of real world politics into your, you know, into the general media. There's Andrei Korechik. I don't know, you want to talk about Andrei?
Yeah, I think it's really important actually just to kind of go close to the crisis, what's happening, a war in Ukraine, basically because Andrei Korechik is somebody who is from Belarus, who is a very well-known theater director and film director who has been in Finland since last summer. And together, it's Artistic Risk, together with the Finnish National Theatre and Yle Drama, produced his latest play, The New Voices of Belarus, in Finnish. You can still listen to it. And we had a premiere in the music house. Helsingin Sanomat has written about him several times, but just to give kind of his international profile, that his last play is toured in more than 200 countries. And as we speak, he's now trying to get his new series into Netflix, and he's filming it in Lithuania. Basically, it tells about the kind of prison conditions in Belarus. So he's extremely international, high-profile figure who lives in Finland now.
A very normal kind of guy, and not easy to talk to, though. He's not at all arrogant or anything. I mean, he's easy to approach if you're interested.
And actually, if you kind of look at the latest issue of Voima, Ida Siimes interviewed Andrei Voima, and actually, it's the president of Ukraine, it's Zelensky, has acted in one of his films 10 years ago. So he's kind of very close to what is happening, and of course, following the situation in Ukraine, Belarus, Russia very, very closely. We have another resident who just actually arrived last Saturday from Kiev, make the whole route. It's basically crossed through Hungary. He's also Belarusian. He's somebody who started modern theater in Minsk 20 years ago and had to leave. It's Belarus. He was in exile in Kiev and started his theater again. And now he had to leave again. He's in double exile. And we hope that his daughter, who is also a theater director, would arrive in Finland. And it's very important also is to know within this crisis that Belarusians who are in Ukraine, they are not in the same situation when they flee Ukraine as Ukrainians, because basically they come with the residency permits in Ukraine, which are short term, but they are not entitled within EU to this 1+1 years permission. So we have been now working with several Belarusian, especially theater people who have arrived in Europe, and their permits are expiring. It is the worst case was that they had 8 days left. And luckily through our network, she's now employed in National Theatre in Prague so that she could get the work contract.
Okay, there's a lot of information.
Yeah.
But before we continue, or probably we should take a break and then have some questions. But maybe we should just quickly show you before, you know, just to open it up, is our Ukraine emergency resources. So this is really important for you and your colleagues and your friends to know about. So what we're doing is we've created an emergency resource page. And on this resource page, there's several other very good resource pages linked. But on top of that, and this has been in Freeze and in Hyperallergic and in Spike magazine and several others. But this here is an important part. It's not about us, it's about the artists and the hosting organizations. So this is a very ABC type situation. Are you an artist at risk from Ukraine? Apply here. So send this to your Ukrainian colleagues. If you're a cultural worker, you're a journalist, a caricaturist, a ceramicist, or anything from Ukraine, please apply. We have an incredibly low, it's getting bigger and bigger, over 130 or something right now. Applicants, I think. It's just changing every day. Here we have, if you're from Belarus or Russia, it's a very different situation, as Marita pointed out. You need a visa, you need an invitation, you need to have some kind of clear papers for the migration authorities. And thirdly, if you want to be a hosting organization, so this is really important because we've been approached by now about 100 hosting organizations all over the continent who said, I can, give a room, I can give 50 rooms, I can give 2 rooms, I can, house them in my farm. And so this is where you apply for that. They're very simple forms. You fill it in, it goes into our database, and we have now constructed a matchmaking team that is bringing the applicants together with the hosts. So this is like kind of become one of the central places for this to happen in Europe, because the Swedish network of residencies, about 70 to 90 organizations has joined us. In Germany, we have many organizations. In Finland, we have some. So it's really become a key place to go. And the good thing is that it's ready for the volume. So if you do this by email, you're going to be lost. You need to have a system. And so we developed the system in the very first days of the war in order to prepare for like hundreds of people applying.
You might know, it's those of you who work in kind of performing arts theater, that we just went to meeting. It's with IETM yesterday. And that's a big umbrella organizations for all the theaters and performing arts worldwide. And their organizations are now also becoming our hosts. And we are matchmaking also applicants from the performing arts. And now the Finnish theaters are also joining this, that basically they will be hosting its professionals from theater field, at least maybe also from performing arts. So we have already matchmade some 50 people. It's basically, some of them are out, some of them are in Ukraine, but they know that when they come to Europe that they have a place to go. And basically these are, as Ivor said, residency institutions, small artist-run spaces and so on, who have provided their facilities. Furthermore, we are raising funds, because it's very important that when artists arrive, that they have a living grant at least for 3 first months. Now we talk about Ukrainians, so that they can set up kind of a new situation. So basically we are doing all of this, it's as we speak. So it's kind of a big operation going on at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's probably enough from us for now. Right? Yeah.
Yes.
Please, if you have any questions, but I'm sure there's a lot of material there.
Thank you, Marita and Ivor. You are doing very important work, and we have to be kind of sorry that you are so busy because of these conditions, because of course it would be better not to have these conditions, but very valuable recommendations and advice for art reviewers and cultural journalists. Thank you, on how to make these voices better heard, and it's important that these are concrete and hands-on advice. They give us an entry point, at least, on how to start. And good that you mentioned Afghanistan as well, because we shouldn't forget about the previous crises when the next ones occur. I have one question first. What happens after the first months when an artist or a cultural worker has arrived? What happens thereafter when they have settled down in the new country? Do you continue to help them, or is there just a restricted period of time?
In normal artist at risk residencies, now we are not talking about war situation like in Ukraine that people are fleeing in masses. Residencies are from 3 to 2 years, so they can be also long ones. And
2 months to 2 years.
Yeah, so it's really, and our principle is that we treat people as professionals, as peers, as artists. So we have a network just to give an example, in Helsinki, we actually, it's Advisory Council Finland, since we also have residency in Porvoo and now Savonlinna and some other cities are joining, which consists of organizations like Tinfo, it's Finnish Pen, Saastamoinen Foundation, Finnish National Theatre, Finnish Visual Artists Union, and City of Porvoo, and so on. There are like more than 15 different organizations. So before the artist arrives, we already look at their artistic profile. Of course, nobody has to do anything, but our experience is that silenced artists usually want to be heard when they are safe. That's the best therapy for them. So we try to kind of, like Andrei Kureitsik's production is example, that he came, and after 3 months he was doing this radio play with Yle Drama, with Soila Valkama, with the actors of National Theatre and with Artist at Risk as a part of production team, and it's still in the radio. So kind of he started to work right away. And now in his case, for example, he got a grant from Kone Foundation. We introduce artists for this kind of grant writing procedures in Finland. Many artists are not familiar with that, and we assist them also if needed. And he has a security now for 2 years after the residency is over. So he has a grant to continue his work with his new project. So then he will be independent. It's just like he's now applying for a work-based residency permit. So of course it doesn't always work like this. Sometimes it's artists move from one country to another if they have better possibilities, let's say in Germany than in Finland, and so on. But in our case, the very last option is asylum, and it hasn't happened many times because it's not a good, it's a very heavy process for an artist as well. And many politically engaged art practitioners, they want to return back if they can. And majority actually goes back within its short period of time after 3 years. We have artists who are now back in Syria, for example, studied the art spaces and so on, and which is extremely important, I mean, for the democratic societies to be built, like in Afghanistan right now. We have to save these people. I mean, it's kind of, you can't destroy culture of one country. They have to get out, and maybe one day they can go back, at least some of them. So that's the principle in our work. But of course, now the situation of Ukrainians, for example, it's very different, and they have different kind of permits in Europe and access to healthcare and social services and so on. So it's a different situation altogether.
Okay. Yeah, if you are thinking about cultural workers like art reviewers who also have to leave their countries, so this kind of forced migration is not a very easy one, because if I'm thinking about the employability of an art critic who is very bound to his or her language, and also the cultural competence, how transferable is it from one country to another, what the conditions for continuing their work is. So you think that it's still working quite okay, because researchers are talking about a thing called brain waste when you move from one country to another, especially if you move from one cultural sphere from a completely different cultural sphere. The competencies that were your asset in your home country are suddenly not valid in the new country, because there's a new language, new cultural understandings, which are very different. So this adjustment may not be.
It's complicated. Yeah, it's very hard. I mean, it's also even hard for very high, like professional qualified people that do very technical things like dentists, you know, or you know, surgeons, and because they don't have a certain certificate, you know, they have to become garbage men, because, you know, it's absurd. Our rules make life very hard for highly qualified people. Afghanistan is a case in point where the level of English of many of our applicants is incredibly good. They're highly educated, you know, IT specialists, designers, you know, very, very cutting edge type thinkers, but they, you know, they can't even get a visa. But when you do get out, then of course there's especially in the cultural field, it's hard, especially if language is your main tool, so to speak. But then of course you need to find a diaspora community if that's where you're going to write. And luckily there is such a thing as the internet, and the internet means that we're not totally based on our location anymore. There's much more of a remote kind of community that you can be part of communities online. So there is, that kind of has some benefits, yeah.
But that's one of the reasons, for example, we do this matchmaking, that we try to find that if somebody speaks German, it's kind of, it makes more sense to end up to Germany than to Finland. Or if you speak Russian, then it's better that you end up, for example, to Czechia, where people still kind of speak Russian and so on. So we look at these kind of indicators when we do relocations of people, that you could continue your career. So, but there are creative kind of solutions, like, for example, Vladimir Ushakov from Belarus, who just came from Kiev. He already has an idea that it's basically his English is really weak, but he wants to work with Finnish actors who have studied in Petersburg and Moscow. There are very many of them. So he can direct in Russian and they can even speak in Finnish. So it's kind of, it depends, but that's his idea at the moment. He has many other ideas as well. That is kind of creativity also. Somehow it can create creative solutions as well.
How do you reach out to art reviewers and cultural journalists then, who could help here as well to make the work of these artists visible? Do you have a systematic method of reaching them, and how are your efforts received in newsrooms? How do you feel about that?
Okay, so we would be very happy if we had the time and resources to kind of have a proper press department, but we don't. We have occasionally worked with some top journalists who've been very lucky that they've come in for a few months and done a few things, and then they've left again onto their journalistic work. And we've kind of gathered a portfolio of different journalists, but it's not been, you know, you need a lot of time to talk to journalists, because journalists, you know, are very interested in really important details. And so you have to kind of keep on, it's a relationship you need to build, and that takes a lot of resources, you know, human resource, time, you know, to talk to the journalists. There have been some incredible people, like in Italy, there's a special section on culture in the Corriere della Sera, which is the leading newspaper in Italy, kind of serious literary, and so it's she's now been following us since the Afghan crisis, and also on the Maaria Ljogena story. We have, yeah, I mean, Hyperallergic was the editor-in-chief of that, was previously on our International Advisory Council. But it's strange because when he was on our council, he felt he couldn't write about us in his newspaper, in Hyperallergic, in that online publication, because it would be a conflict of interest. But now that he's moved on, he can do it. So it's kind of a bit of a double-edged sword. Knowing people closely, then they feel they shouldn't be, you know, promoting you or something. So it's always this kind of, you know, we want to be fair, but we also need to address so many different audiences. And we're addressing, first of all, the artists at risk. Then we're policymakers to open the borders or do things like, you know, provide a certain kind of services and funding. And then it's just the general public who wants to know what's going on. And it's very hard, you know, we have to address all of these things.
They're like in this Afghanistan story, it was quite visible in Deutsche Welle and so on. We have certain journalists who kind of has followed work of artists at risk, but I mean, it's kind of, there are many more stories to be told that we can make visible, because there are so many. It's amazing. It's art practitioners we host, and for sure each one of them would be kind of worth kind of many stories.
Yeah, we just did a big event in Paris with Orlan, one of the greatest French feminist artists of the 70s, 80s, 90s. And, you know, nobody outside of Paris even noticed. And yeah, Nadia Tolikonova and Masha of Pussy Riot were part of it. It's like 3 top feminist artists and nothing, you know, because you have to spend a lot of time working with journalists to get them to notice it. We did have some interviews before that in French television. and then the Parisienne and some other hip hop and graffiti places, journals. But it takes a lot of, a press department. We're a very small organization. So we're hoping that, we have your help in getting it out.
Yes, I can think that also from a journalistic point of view, or for an individual journalist, if you are a freelancer, which most of the art reviewers and even a number of cultural journalists are, it's not easy to sell a story of an artist, a foreign artist who might be unknown for the general audience. And then especially reviewing is so much connected to the requirement that the work that's addressed should be accessible right now for the audiences we are targeting. And there are many factors that may make it more difficult also for journalists to cover these issues, even if they are important. But professional qualified journalists certainly find the way, only they discover these topics. But when you think you have been following the journalistic coverage now, how would you improve the coverage? Are you happy with the way journalists are addressing these issues, or are there some shortcomings, biases, or pitfalls that should be corrected, in your opinion? Do you see any patterns?
I mean, I don't know, so I don't read in Finnish, so it's difficult for me to say in Finland, but in other countries I can say something. Go ahead.
Well, I think it's generally, I think we already discussed that there is usually is kind of one topic at the time, as we talked about it, that is for example, now it's Afghanistan is forgotten. Also Belarus is already kind of also, it's out of scope and so on, that's certainly the case, that the case is somewhere for a couple of weeks and then it kind of moves on. And of course, that's one of the core problems. And I think that generally now, if you think about kind of Finnish, I think it's very important to have the voices of Russian dissidents strongly visible at the moment, because at least I sense this kind of this Russophobia, it is kind of real in Finland, and we really had to work that it's not going to take over. And as we know that you just can't tell on the street that is who is Ukrainian, who is Russian, because everybody speaks Russian. That's also, and they are kind of long lost relatives also, and so on, even though the hatred is of course now between Russians and Ukrainians as well. But it's very important in the Finnish society, especially, that we kind of work on that. That it's basically, there was just this petition, 17,000, it's Russian arts and cultural professionals signed, and now they are also, we know that some of them are already arrested because of that. So they take kind of big risks. And if anybody can change Russian society and political system, it's Russian dissidents. So we really had to give them our support, that they have courage to do what they need to do. And they can get out when they need to get out, and then they can speak up. It's extremely crucial.
Did you mention the 15 years?
No, I didn't say just quote.
I'm sure I hope you're aware that they passed a law just 2 days ago in the Russian lower and upper house, criminalizing all negative statements about the war. And the Russian government doesn't even speak of it as a war. And it not only criminalizes it, it makes it punishable by 15 years in prison. 15 years in the gulag. That's a lot of time. You're a different human being when you come out of that. So if you're a journalist in Russia and you're standing up to the regime, you deserve quite a bit of respect for that kind of courage, and they've done it in the past. And even Novaya Gazeta, which is the most kind of progressive mainstream kind of big publication, had to, I think, remove some huge number of articles, like some 50 to 70% of its articles had to be removed in order to not be prosecuted. So it's a very bad situation, and people are doing very stupidly courageous things, almost like going on the street and demonstrating against the war, because they're arrested and put in prison immediately. So Russian civil society is trying, but it's very, very harsh, and there's really a need for support for them. And I mean, it's very interesting. I read somebody who just escaped to Macedonia, a journalist, cartoonist, in fact, and he basically said, look, you know, I understand my government is a terrible aggressor, and I have no identification with it, and I've always demonstrated against it and worked against it. But I'm hated, of course, by everybody else in Europe too. And I'm now stuck in Macedonia with a few pennies left to my name and my whole life left behind. So this is a different kind of level of danger that they're facing as Belarusians, Russians, others that are kind of inside the regime that we're kind of fighting, right? And so that's a difficult situation. We can't blame the people of every country for their leadership. You have to be aware of that.
Indeed, that brings us back to the hate speech question. Just one last question. There has been discourses on or some opinions where in accordance to the economic and other kind of sanctions against Russia, we should now erode all Russian and Belarusian topics from our public sphere. Should we stop reviewing Russian and Belarusian artists' work now? What do you think? I guess your answer is quite
it's kind of obvious. No, I mean, look, I understand a Ukrainian doesn't want to sit next to you know, a Russian person, no matter who they are, just because they're just so full of anger and can't just stand it. But we're able to be apart from that, and we have to help them also get over that, because it's exactly the kind of nationalist, xenophobic and terribly racist kind of attitude which we're fighting against, no? And because it isn't the person's birthplace or color or whatever sex or gender orientation that we are fighting, but the forces behind it that are doing the evil. And so we have to treat people for what they stand for themselves, not for, you know, their origins.
And I don't know, it's kind of basically, if you look at kind of, it's in Belarus, there are more political prisoners, and in European history, it's after the war. I mean, it's kind of basic, and people have sentences up to 18 years, and there's now, they are arresting people again because the case is in Ukraine. And if you look at like Ulazimir Ushakov, who just came from Kiev, that he grew up in Russia. I mean, it's basically, it's kind of, it's all getting together, and he also left to Kiev because he had a prison sentence waiting for him. It's kind of, in this kind of situation.
He grew up also in Tashkent.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, these are very international people. I mean, some of the Russian generals are actually half Ukrainian. It's just, it doesn't make any sense.
But
and we shouldn't play their game. That's the worst thing, is when fascism rises, is to respond with fascism. It's not the right way.
And who is going to fight the Russian regime if it's not dissidents in Belarus and Russia? I don't understand who is going to fight Lukashenko or Putin if we don't support these people who are trying to do it. And when they do it, if they kind of threaten their lives and we kind of don't make their voices heard, what are we doing?
But of course you can, I mean, just to answer your question more directly, yes. I mean, if there was a chauvinist, you know, Belarusian pro-Lukashenko play being put on in the National Theatre in Helsinki, I would boycott it too. But if it's you know, a dissident friend and progressive anti-Lukashenko, you know, director, I would invite all my friends. You know, that's how I would do it.
Yes, that's clear. So there is space for art review criticism. Thank you, Marita, Muukkonen, and Ivor Stodolsky. Thank you so much for following today's session. Thank you for all our speakers for sharing your insights and experiences. And our next and final webinar in this series will be held in October, and it will be about art criticism and money. So please keep an eye on the project website kritiikkinäkyy.fi. and follow the project in social media. We would be very happy to see you again. Thank you for listening today and have a nice day.